Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Emphasize the 60 beats per minute roughly pulse, and you can get the signal at the bottom. And you can then extract that signal by doing the temporal filtering and add it back in amplified to the original video, so you can reveal this pulsation that's happening that we can't see. So we're all sort of glowing off on, and we can reveal it here. It also works somewhat well for non-Caucasians, although we can amplify it in the, to really make it work well, we'll probably have to change how we amplify it, but there is the same signal there as well. And you can then go from that visualized signal, from that measured signal, you can make measurements over many patches. So there's patches plotted vertically, and the peak detected for each patch plotted horizontally. Then you can take the median of all those values and measure a pulse rate. So you can get a non-contact measurement of the pulse of a patient. So we actually did a hospital study with neonatal infants at Winchester Hospital near Boston, and measured. So just to motivate this, the reason there are many reasons why you don't want to touch someone but measure their pulse nonetheless. One is that with neonatal infants, you want to handle them as little as possible. So we did a controlled study where the pulse was being measured by contact means, and we compared that with our visual measurement, and getting good results. I should point out we weren't the first people to point out that you can measure the pulse by video means. Roz Picard at the Media Lab did some nice work, but they used, doing just that, but they used a rather complicated way to measure the pulse, and we kind of followed in their footsteps, but we decided to do it in a much simpler way. So their method is to combine the 3 RGB traces, put it all into big ICA, independent components analysis, machine learning method, and take component number 2, which they said corresponded to the pulse. And we chose to do it in a more direct way, which then allows you to visualize this signal, which may have medical uses just by itself. One benefit of our method is that you should be able to detect asymmetries in the blood flow to the skin by this visualization approach, and that may be diagnostic of disease. Continuing on with other methods, there are actually 2 different apps you can get for your cell phone which measure pulse visually as well. So then let's get on to motion. So when we looked at these color amplified signals, we just were constantly struck by the fact that it wasn't there. But we were struck by the fact that the head seemed to move. And it just didn't make any sense to us. You know, we're sitting at 1 pixel position, amplifying a bandpass temporal signal, and we get this extra motion. And we scratched our heads to figure out why, and came up with a reason why, or found out why, and then used it in a controlled way to amplify motion as well. So what's going on? So let's look at a simple sinusoid signal. Suppose that it really did move, say, horizontally. So starting with the black, say it moved to the middle one, the blue one. If you sit at 1 position and look at the temporal variation and amplify it, you'll, I wish I had a pointer, by the way, but anyway, you'll go to the vertical arrow, and then if you amplify it, you might go to the arrow going up to the red line. Now, if that intensity signal as a function of space is locally flat, if it's a straight line there, then amplifying that vertical displacement is exactly the same thing as what you would get if you sat at 1 point, see how much it translates horizontally, and amplified the horizontal motion displacement. It's the same thing if that intensity as a function of space is a straight line. And so this is telling you that if you do a Taylor series expansion, which approximates the local intensity as a function of space by a straight line, that this should work out. And indeed, you can go through the math to show that this gives you that result. So let me just do really quickly. Suppose your intensity as a function of space and time is some fixed function f that varies over space, and you've got some wiggling over as a function of time. If you do Taylor series expansion, you get the second line. And then we're going to bandpass filter that and add in an amplified version. So we're going to add an alpha minus 1 times the bandpass filtered version. And if you combine that with the line above, you'll get this line, which shows that you have the original envelope plus alpha times this temporal modulation part. Then using the Taylor series a second time, you can put this back into the function and see that what you have is an amplification of the motion amount doing this spatial processing, doing this temporal processing. And let's look at a particular function for a variation of intensity over space. Let's say it's a sinusoid. Then again, the top line, if it moves by some amount, what we're interested in is amplifying the motion by this factor alpha, and the linearized version is on the very top line. The exact version is on the line below it, and we're looking for the conditions where this approximation is close to the exact approach. And you can see by comparing those top two that this holds when cosine of that argument is 1, or sine of that argument is the argument itself. If we want it to hold within a factor of 10%, then we want these conditions to hold, which tells us when this approximation will be valid. When the magnification amount is small, when the spatial frequency is, the wavelength is large, or the spatial frequency is small, and when the true displacement is also small. So, and then just here's some examples using the sinusoidal signal. On the top line, we have a sinusoid, and different displacements of it, shown in this rainbow of different colors. And on the bottom, we have our linearized approximation to this, starting from a small translation of it. If it's a very large spatial frequency thing, we get a fairly good approximation to that true translation, whereas if it's a high detail thing, the approximation breaks down pretty quickly, and we get intensity saturation, typically. So this motivates a very simple architecture for doing this in real time on videos. We're going to take our video sequence and break it up into different spatial frequency bands, because we know each spatial frequency band, we can boost the motion a different amount for each band. And so then we may want to treat those differently. Then we apply a desired temporal processing to isolate the motions that we're interested in magnifying, and then boost the spatial frequencies accordingly and add it back all up together to get the processed output. And then how might we want to treat each spatial band differently? Well, for the ones where the approximation is going to hold, we might want to boost it by a factor of alpha. But then for the very small wavelengths, the very high detail things, we might want to scale back on how much we're boosting the motions. So that's the algorithm. It's real simple. It's signal processing rather than computer vision, which makes it easy and reliable. So here's an example of it working. This is, on the left is me taking a video in the subway, and on the right is the motion magnified, showing all the small oscillations of the camera jostling in the subway being amplified. And it's simple, as I said, it's really simple to do in real time. We have a demo that runs on a laptop. I won't show it to you now, but that's available. And then let me just show you some examples. So this actually may be a real-world application that people really do want to do, because we got a lot of feedback on this saying, yeah, I want that. Oftentimes, parents of newborns babies want to check if their baby is breathing. And so you can do motion magnification to amplify small changes. And on the right there, you see the motion magnified version of the baby. Here's one showing the pulsation in the artery in the wrist. You can see that magnified version on the right, and on the left in the input video, your eye can't really detect any motion or any changes going on there. On the bottom, just to kind of show you in a static presentation, here's a little space-time cut showing, as a function of time and vertical position, what the intensity is in the unprocessed video, and here it is in the processed video, where you can see, again, in the spatial presentation now, the oscillations over time. So there's kind of two pieces to it. One is the simple spatial filtering, and the other is the temporal filtering to isolate what part of it you want amplified. There are a number of different temporal filters you can use depending on what problem you're trying to address or what you're trying to focus on. If you're trying to measure the pulse and you know really precisely where it's going to be, you might use a very narrowband temporal filter to amplify and add back in. If you just want to generally find generalized motions, you might use a very broad temporal filter. So this is filter response as a function of temporal frequency for these plots. So let me show you some examples of how this temporal filtering can pick out the different things where you want the motion amplified. Suppose here's our source video on the left. It's a synthesized Gaussian blob that's moving just a little bit. You may be able to see it moving here. And then there on the right is the motion magnified amount. Suppose we have many different ones all together. They're all moving at different frequencies, 2, 3, 5, 7 hertz. And we're applying, in this case, a temporal filter between 1 and 3 hertz and adding that amplified signal back in. And there you can see we just pull out the motions, amplify the motions of the 2 hertz moving blob. And then you can select for which blob you want to see the motions of by modifying the temporal filter. So here we're having a 2 to 4 hertz temporal filter. We apply it globally over the image, and only that one blob that's moving at 3 hertz gets amplified. Same with the 5 hertz blob, and same with the 7 hertz blob. Sorry. And same with the 7 hertz blob. Now you can do this on real images as well. So here's a high-speed video of a guitar with all the strings being struck. Now we can pull out the motion of the low E string by applying a narrowband filter at near its frequency and amplifying that signal, adding it back in, or with the A string and making it modified, making it move as well. So again, we're visualizing motions that are really there, and but we do it in a way that avoids us having to measure the motion and amplify it explicitly, which is very hard to do accurately. Here's another one. On the left is a SLR camera in burst mode, where the mirror is flipping up and down really fast. Again, it's high-speed video, 300 frames per second. I can't see any motion in that, but on the right we have the motion magnified version where you can see the motion. Now, one thing you'll notice on these, by the way, it's quite noisy. In part B of the talk, we'll get rid of the noise. And then, the question when we look at this, well, gee, is it really the motion that we're amplifying? So to address that, we did the experiment again and duct taped a laser pointer to the camera and aimed it at a mirror on the other side of the room and reflected the laser pointer back next to the camera so you could see it here. And you can see it actually wiggling, and it corresponds to when the motion magnified SLR moves. So it is indeed the motion of the camera itself that we're seeing in this motion magnified version. And so we're confirming that with this large lever arm of the laser pointer. But it's not just videos that we take that you can magnify the colors of. Here's from Batman Begins. We can show that Bruce Wayne really does have a pulse. There he is. The courtesy of Warner Brothers is in quotes, but we think it's fair use of copyrighted material. And I just want to explain the name, why we call it Eulerian motion magnification. We had a version of this about 6 years ago where we did the hard problem, where we actually tracked points and measured motions and took great care at occlusion boundaries to not measure spurious motions, because it's really easy to, it's very difficult to measure motion accurately at occlusion boundaries. And then we found a motion for every point and exaggerated it and re-rendered it. That's the hard way. This is now the easy way, where we use a so-called Eulerian approach, where you sit at a fixed coordinate system and don't follow the flow of the fluid. These Eulerian and Lagrangian are terms from fluid mechanics. So we call this Eulerian motion magnification. And we presented this at last year's SIGGRAPH, and it got a lot of attention in the blogosphere. We posted our code, and a lot of people are using it, which is nice to see. This also, part of it was done in collaboration with Quanta Research in Cambridge, and they made an upload site where you could take a video. You don't have to download the MATLAB code and process it as well. So other people have read our simple paper and re-implemented it and posted code on the web, so you can download from GitHub webcam pulse detector and a video amplifier, again written by other people, which is nice to see. And then people take their own videos and apply them. So here's the world's first guinea pig undergoing Eulerian motion magnification. There's the process on the right. This was posted on YouTube. They didn't contact us. They just posted it, and we found it. And another group in Dresden, Germany, read our paper, they said in their comments, and made a version again. So this is from high-speed video and visualizing the flow of the blood to the face and using a pseudocolor visualization for that. And this one is my favorite. This was, again, posted by someone who just downloaded our code and used it. On the left is the unmodified pregnant belly with the fetus moving inside, and on the right is the processed output amplifying those small changes. I'm told that's kind of what it feels like, but I don't know. So that's the Eulerian video magnification. And so what's wrong with it? Well, we're excited about it, but it is somewhat sensitive to noise. You saw that in some of the sequences. Also, if you push it too far beyond where our guideline rules tell you you shouldn't amplify it, you tend to get saturation of intensities. And so we developed a new approach, which we're presenting at SIGGRAPH next week, which is just really simple and satisfying for that, I guess, because it does much better than the other one. We take the image, put it into a multi-scale, multi-orientation steerable pyramid, a sort of wavelet representation where we have sine and cosine phase filters at every position, scale, and orientation. We measure the local phase, measure local phase changes, and just amplify them as if we were amplifying the intensities. So instead of adding extra noise in, we're just kind of moving the noise around, and it's much less sensitive to noise, which is pleasing. And again, the thing which is really kind of satisfying about this is that we don't have to compute the motion explicitly in order to make a motion amplified sequence. We just modify these phases, so we don't resolve the aperture problem. We don't do these extra pieces that you would have to do if you actually solved for motion everywhere, but it works quite well to give visually pleasing motion magnified outputs. So here now is the new motion magnification processing pipeline. We take the video sequence, break it into a multi-scale steerable pyramid at every time frame. And this gives us even and odd phase quadrature filters at every position, scale, and orientation. Then we can use those even and odd phase filters to measure phase as a function of time. Then we take that phase as a function of time signal and do the same bandpass processing as we did before, amplify it, add it back in, collapse the whole thing, we get the processed output. So let me show you the new results. This is a picture of a sine wave under a Gaussian. That's basically, in effect, what these filters are in the image decomposition. So here on the left is last year's method, which I just told you about. On the right is the new method where we modify the phases, so it's much less noisy. Also, we can push things farther than we could before. And it's essentially, it's a little bit more computational cost, but maybe a factor of 2, not too much. Why is that doing that? Okay. So again, left column is last year, right column is this year. So again, we can push the strings farther, we can push the camera farther, and we have much less of the noise present in the constant regions. Okay, so let me show you also some of the new things we can do. Let's see. Okay, so one thing we can do, which is fun, is we can do motion stabilization or freeze frame. Now, okay, so I've actually frozen the video in this case, but that's not what I'm talking about. On the left is going to be the source video. On the right is going to be what we call motion pause. Now here we're doing the opposite of motion magnification. We're trying to minimize the phase change at every point over time. But it's not a freeze frame. Time goes on. You'll see the lights passing on through the video on the right frame, even though it's motion stabilized. So we call that motion pause. So here's the somewhat moving input, raw input, and here's the motion paused version. And again, here's another one. This is the time lapse of wiggling plants over time, and then motion paused is on the right. Okay, that's motion pause. Now we can also do another method we call fast forward. So suppose you're a scientist looking at a microscope with some cells that are dividing really, really slowly, and you want to say, okay, what's going on? Let's fast forward. You like to press a button and say, let me see the whole thing that's going on there imperceptibly. Let me see it faster. So we call that motion fast forward. Or you might be an astronomer looking at the Crab Nebula exploding over hundreds of years, and you want to say, what's going to happen later? Let me fast forward that. So you can do that with this new method also. You just look at the most recent change and amplify that motion. So here's, as soon as I started, on the left is going to be toggling back and forth between two frames of my house taken 15 seconds apart. So what happens in 15 seconds with a camera on a tripod? Not much, but the shadows move a little bit. And then on the right, we're going to do motion fast forward, where we're going to see the shadows, see that small motion right now exaggerated. So there on the right, you see the motion fast forward. Let me show it one more time. There you can see this. So that's exaggerating this 15 seconds worth of the Earth's motion causing the shadows to move. Oh yeah, and so then the question which always comes up is, are you looking at something that's real or is it not real? And so we have done some experiments to try to address this. Here's one. We have a speaker on a drum, and the speaker has a volume knob. So there's two ways we can amplify the motion. We can crank up the volume by a factor of 10 and have a factor of 10 more power coming at the membrane, or we can do it in software with our motion magnification system, and we can compare the two. So let's show you, look at that. So here's the raw video. It's hard to see that much is moving. And then here's the motion magnified. That's magnifying the motion artificially. And then the next, here's a comparison with ground truth. So the middle is artificial magnification. The right is cranking up the volume and taking a video of what's going on. Okay, this next one is different. Just to explain it, just for fun, again, this is the same story. You can pull out what you want to focus your magnification on by the temporal filtering. So here we have the source now is a sum of two tones. And in this middle one, when I start to play it, we'll exaggerate one tone or exaggerate the other tone. And you see a different spatial pattern that's magnified on the drum head, depending on which set of phases we've temporally filtered for. So both of those motions are there, but we're just pulling out and exaggerating the desired one based on our temporal filtering. Looking at people is really fun with this. There's all sorts of small motions that people make that are just delightful to look at and exaggerate. Here's one. This is high-speed video of someone's eye. We make microsaccades. Those are required to see. And here we can exaggerate those, and also very small head tremors as well. They're both exaggerated in this video. So when I started on the left, again, it's hard to see any motion at all, will be the raw high-speed video input. On the right is the motion magnified. Now it's moving. So on the right, we can see motions that... and what's appealing is it looks like a bowl of jelly moving underwater, and I think that's probably a good model for what's really there. So we hope this is a new and useful tool for scientists, for all sorts of applications. Sorry, all these little twists to it. Let me show you some more twists. We call this a frequency sweep. So the top left is, this is all moving, right? Yeah, top left is input video. Outside my house, not much going on. Just a little bit of wind, not much. It's hard to see in the input video. Now we're going to look at different temporal frequencies within this input signal and exaggerate them to see what tiny motions are going on at these different temporal frequencies within this input video. So here we're amplifying the low frequencies, 0.1 to 0.5 hertz. What goes on with these trees at very low frequencies? Well, the branches kind of move a little bit. Again, you can't actually see that there, but you can pull it out and see that that is what's going on at a very small amplitude. Here's the mid frequencies. And the high frequencies, you can see the leaves kind of shimmering. And again, for me, none of those are really perceptible from the input. Frequency sweeps on people are fun. Here's my daughter. I asked her to just stay still. So the top left is the input of her just staying still. But what happens with a person in very small motions at these different time frames? Well, at the low temporal frequencies, what's going on is she's breathing. And so you can see that very slowly here. At the mid frequencies, 1 to 2 hertz, what's going on? Well, it's hard to tell what's going on. It's kind of little micro expressions are happening. Sometimes people look at this and say, oh, you can read her mind and see what she's thinking. I have no idea whether that's true. I probably bet it isn't true, but who knows? And at the high frequencies, what's going on? Not too much. She makes eye saccades, and also you can see that the noise starts to get amplified at those high temporal frequencies. And just kind of going full circle, you can also then, with this motion pause, you can amplify the color changes without having the coupled motion amplification as well. So here's doing that. So in the middle is what we showed last year, which has color amplification plus motion moved in. Now you can separate the two and just amplify the color without amplifying the motion because you're stabilizing the motion. Yes, sorry. I wanted to show you one part of this that I hadn't shown before. This is another sequence of another eye. I just
fixates at a point. The eye may move from subtle head motions or from involuntary eye movements known as microsaccades. Such motions are very hard to notice, even in this close-up shot of the eye, but become apparent when amplified 150 times.
I want to show you this crane. So you can look at mechanical structures as well.
Designed to sway in the wind, but their motion too is often invisible.
So again, on the left, I really can't see any motion of the crane.
This video reveals the swaying of the crane's mast and the undulation of its hook.
And I should say this was part of a competition we entered for from the National Science Foundation on Engineering Visualization Challenge. And we got honorable mention. It appeared in Science. So some recent things. We have a high-speed camera, and it's really fun to play around with. So this technique, I think, is useful at really any time scale. You could use it at time-lapse imagery, at normal time-scale imagery, or at high-speed imagery. I think it's particularly appropriate for high-speed imagery because the story in my head is that high-speed photography, you need extra light because there's not much light at that high speed, and you also need to add extra motion because there's not much motion going on at very high speed. But let's look at some of that. So here's a high-speed camera looking at a car. So here's the raw high-speed video, and it's hard to see anything going on there. And here's the motion magnified high-speed video, magnified by a factor of 30, and now you can see the different engine parts moving one relative to another. And here it is a comparison of the input high-speed video, the output motion magnified high-speed video. And then we're also having fun looking at ourselves again. So here's Michael, and he's going to sing. Okay. And this is the ordinary speed video of it. Here's the high-speed video where, I don't see anything going on. But let's look at the motion magnified high-speed video. So again, we sort of focus what we want to magnify on by looking at the acoustic signal in this case. We find the fundamental frequency from the acoustic signal and then apply a narrowband filter to that to reveal all this motion of his throat as he articulates that tone. And then we can also pick out a different harmonic of that. So let's go up to the first harmonic. And now we can visualize what's going on at the first harmonic, and you can see the different spatial structure for what's oscillating at the first harmonic. And we're really excited about this for possible applications in medicine, we hope. I think I'll stop there. How much time do I have? Do you know? I haven't kept track. 0. Okay, fine. It's a pleasure talking with you. Thank you very much.
I was wondering if it's possible to generalize this for a moving object. So if the variations on something which is moving itself.
Yeah, so that is the direction we want to go. Those missing 2 frames, because I ran over time, we're going to point in that direction. We're interested in looking at, so here we're amplifying motions, small motions relative to 0. We'd also like to amplify small motions of one motion relative to another motion. And we've done initial work on that, and it's a much harder thing, but I think it'll bear a lot of fruit as well.
Okay, let's thank our speaker one more time. And as Andrew is setting up, it's my pleasure to introduce Andrew Blake, who is a Microsoft Distinguished Scientist and is also the director of our Microsoft Cambridge, UK Research Lab. Andrew was an academic in the UK for 18 years, most recently at Oxford. And then he joined Microsoft Research in 1999, where he founded the Computer Vision Group and recently took over as the director of the lab. So Andrew is going to be presenting some work done in Cambridge. Commonly, a lot of you may know it as KinectFusion, but it's basically taking range data and building 3D models by scanning range sensors around an environment. Andrew?
Great, thank you. Yes, so this is, it is not I, but Shahram Izadi, who you see there at the bottom. This is a collaboration between people who do human-computer interaction and people who do vision in the lab in Cambridge. And what it's about is, they call it KinectFusion. This is a portable device for capturing 3D structure, and they've been working on this for a while, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the basics of it and also about some of the more recent work that they're doing, which is going to be presented at SIGGRAPH next week, on scaling this up, that is to allow the capture of structure to work over arbitrary sized scenes and to do this in real time. So here's the idea that 3D fabrication is becoming very important. So at the top right there you see a 3D copier which is pumping out a model of a building. And so where's the data going to come from for this building? It would be great to be able to walk around the building and capture the necessary 3D data. And then at the bottom right, you've got the illustration of a system which is being built for scientists to do non-invasive measurements, in this case of plants growing. And again, it would be good to have a precise metrology system that would work in real time and capture that kind of information. And lastly, a system that we've been playing with, doing augmented reality in medical images. We have quite a lot of work going on in medical images, but here the KinectFusion has captured the head model, and now all kinds of augmented reality information can be projected inside the head. You see there the brain, and if there are abnormalities by any chance, then those could be visualized. So, this could really be very helpful for surgeons and for trainee surgeons. So what could we do to build a system that would do the necessary 3D reconstruction? Of course, this is a topic that's been visited a good deal over more than a decade. And so here are a couple of systems which are doing very high quality reconstructions. One using a gantry with a robot on it and a laser range sensor on the gantry moving around, and the other one using high quality conventional photography, an SLR camera positioned at various points around a sculpture. And you get very good quality 3D reconstructions out of this, but it's essentially offline. It takes quite some time to process and to capture, so that it doesn't have the kind of interactive feel that we're really looking for. Other systems that do 3D reconstruction offline, here are three more, one from Noah and Rick, indeed, and collaborators at the bottom right there. And you can get, again, dense reconstruction, very high quality, but not real time necessarily. Some people have tried to build compact object scanners, somewhat portable, for example, from the Z-scanner system at the top right there, which uses markers on the object to help capture the the camera position, because of course that is part of the job. If you're going to use a roving camera, excuse me, I think I lost my voice on the ship last night because it's like, all-night partying. That's what it does to you. So the markers on the lion there are to help the camera keep track of its own motion, and so that's a little bit limited. And the system at the bottom left there, Weiser et al., is also constructing the scene, but actually it is point-based. So if you zoomed into those reconstructed surfaces, in fact, they'd start to fragment. The illusion of there being a surface there is, in fact, an illusion. We want to have real dense, solid surfaces extracted from this machine if we can. A monocular SLAM, another technology. SLAM is the simultaneous localization and mapping, a much researched and developed technology where a camera uses natural texture in the scene to keep track of its own motion. And so you can build a system here which doesn't have markers. It's a single handheld camera. It works over a large scale, but it doesn't. None of these systems give us both dense reconstruction and real-time operation all at once. So there's a kind of a trade-off of three critical parameters that we want to attend to: the scale on which the system will operate, the quality and density of reconstruction that comes out, and the speed in the sense of, is the thing interactive in real time or is it not? And so the aim of Shahram and his group's work was to investigate this trade-off. Here's what they came up with. Using the Kinect camera, because that's almost a portable system. Of course, it has a tether attached to it, so it's not completely free, but at least it's lightweight and movable. And also the aim was to make maximum use of the GPU in order to get the real-time operation. So there are 4 steps in the processing here, which, as I say, makes heavy use of the GPU, first published in 2011 with this highly multi-authored paper. I'm not really going to talk about the first step, which is fairly straightforward, which is simply to process the depth image, which is 2.5D, and get 3-dimensional points, a point cloud and normals. That's fairly straightforward, but I want to talk about the following 3 steps. So the first thing is to do the camera pose estimation, the operation that was being done with SLAM in those previous examples, and those SLAM systems use sparse features chosen for their distinctiveness in the image, and aligns those features. But in contrast, this system is hoping to get the very most information out of the system by using dense features. And so there's an iterated closest point scheme taking one view, as illustrated here, a particular position of the camera, and the surface that can be seen in that camera. And then the task is to take another view and register that view using its features, its 3-dimensional features with the first view, and thereby also to register the cameras. And this is done using a well-known error metric, which there's a little bit of subtlety to it here because it registers only the normal displacement of the 2 surfaces when they're misregistered and successfully ignores translational displacements, which after all are not really observable. Displacements in the tangent plane don't count, as it were. And also, of course, there's the possibility of points which don't match, so there's a data association problem to solve, and what you expect is that after the registration is complete, some subset of points will match, but there's also going to be a subset that won't match up, and that allows, having a matching system which recognizes that, allows more tolerance in the matching scheme, and so, for example, we'll put up with objects that are moving in and out of the scene, provided they are, as it were, a minority of the material in the scene. Next step in the fusion pipeline is to fuse so now that the cameras have been positioned relatively using the iterated closest point technique, the next step is to sort of use those positions and now attend back to the 3-dimensional data and try to piece together these patches of 3-dimensional data. And that's done using a method that's been known for quite a while from Curlis and Lavoie, 1996, using the sign distance map. The distance map is a technique that's used quite a lot in vision as well. The idea is that you build a dense map where every voxel is filled with a value representing its distance, positive or negative, from a surface. So you see the vertical purple line here represents the surface, and the pseudocolor map is the positive or negative distance from that surface. And you can also get, you can read the position of the surface out by looking for the zero crossings and interpolating, and you can also compute the gradient to that surface. So now that sign distance map actually has to be constructed. Here's how you might do it in one view. Here's a camera viewing some surface points, and now let's attend to one of those surface points. Here's the ray through it, and so the trick is to take that point, project it back onto the image plane, look at its the range data, and construct the sign distance function, but only to do it over a limited band. So this purple, is that purple? Maroon? I don't know what that color is. Whatever that color is a limited band where the sign distance function is reconstructed. Don't bother to reconstruct the sign distance function far away from that band, because you'll never need it. That's the principle. In so doing, one can economize a good deal on the computation. And as well as constructing the sign distance over the band, of course, all of the points closer than the band to the camera are known to be free space. This is the principle of space carving, well-known principle, and so that's additional information that the system has. And now, having done this for each of the camera views, the sign distance function is used to amalgamate the information from multiple views, and in each case, the voxel centers are projected back to the screen, and the sign distance function is computed to the nearby feature. But then the last step is that when you come in with a new view, you weight the sign distance function that's computed from the new view with this cumulating sign distance function that comes from all of the previous views. And an appropriate weighting scheme there improves the quality of information. So there's a measure of super resolution happening because of this progressive weighting scheme. And so we get the global sign distance function, which is reconstructing the surface as computed from all of those views together. And lastly, the surface extraction step is fairly straightforward, done by ray marching. And I should emphasize that one of the contributions of Shahram and his colleagues' paper is to do all of this in a way that is GPU friendly. And there's some sort of fine detail there in the way that the data is distributed across the GPU that allows them to get this all happening in real time. So we have now the complete pipeline for basic fusion.
Sit here.
And here it is being
so
demoed by none other than Bill Gates.
If I do this right, shouldn't cause any damage if I don't.
Ed
Lazowska
camera is there.
And I've got, you can see Ed there sitting in the chair. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the software, the model, put balls on him, and he can shake these balls off. So he can put the balls back on, he's got to do it again. So anyway, it gives you a little bit of a sense that this really is a model that could be fun to work with. All right, thanks, Ed.
So indeed, we thank Ed for lending his body to science and being abused in that way on stage. Okay, so that's sort of part one of the talk. Part two is how do we take this idea and extend it spatially pretty much to arbitrary extent in space. And, you know, if we did it the way I've just described, there'd be trouble, because the amount of data needed to construct that sign distance function over a given volume. Here's an example. Maybe you want to work in a 2 meter volume with 4 millimeter precision. That's about what's realizable from the Kinect, and you've used up 0.5 gigabyte just to do that. And actually, even in a static view, the Kinect range is considerably larger than that, so you'd need more than that amount of data even without moving the Kinect. Now we want to move the Kinect camera over arbitrary distances in space, and clearly we don't have infinite amounts of memory to do this with. So what can we do about this? Well, there are two obvious points to attack in the scheme that we have so far. First of all, that the uniform grid is representing space densely and uniformly, whereas more interesting things are happening in some areas of space than others. So it would make sense to use finer sampling in the areas of space where the most interesting things are happening. And the other thing is that the signed distance function is anyway sparse, which is almost the same point, that the areas of space that are never going to be occupied by a surface could really be very coarsely quantized indeed. So the idea then is to do what they call hierarchical fusion, which is a little bit in the manner of an octree representation of space, but you'll see that in the detail it's not exactly an octree that gets used. And as well as the use of the octree, there's also the notion of having to stream space through the GPU as if the GPU was a cache, because the GPU has a finite amount of memory even with this hierarchical organization, and so space has to be streamed in and out of the GPU and backed off as appropriate. So yes, I'll get eventually to towards the end to this idea of why this is not exactly an octree and the nature of the branching factor that makes this work the best. So hierarchical volumetric fusion, it's kind of, as you might expect, here's an initial coarse grid with spatial positions from the sensor marked on it. And the idea is to, of course, as I said, subdivide the grid in the areas where the surface is and where the fine detail is required, and multiple subdivisions as illustrated there. Then the question is, how do you make the decision about what grid cells to subdivide and which not to do? And so the procedure is that you take a specimen grid cell like that one in the middle on the left and project the entire volume back onto the image plane, and now sweep across the image plane, following rays back out from the 2.5D representation of depth, and cast those rays through the square to see whether the 3D points out there actually sit inside the square or outside the square. And of course, there's a bit of subtlety here because there has to be some notion of reliability of the measurements. And so one subtlety is to acknowledge that in active range systems, the variance of depth changes as you move around in space. So the basic principle is that closer points closer to the range sensor are more accurately captured than points further away. And that variance is used in making this decision about whether that voxel is a complex voxel with pieces of surface passing through it, or a simple voxel that need not be subdivided. And so that is done. And then finally, the surface extraction step. I didn't actually explain it in detail previously, and I won't spend time on it now, but it's basically a matter of now casting rays from a fixed position through this voxel array and interpolating the intersections interpolating the zero crossings to work out the position of the surface throughout space. And then finally, there is this extra idea that that memory in the GPU is precious and has to be treated like a cache and streamed in and out as the camera moves through the scene. And so you maintain a working set which has to be constantly revised as the camera moves in space. Now, here's an interesting thing that they found, which is a little bit of a new idea, which is that you might have thought that the octree was the obvious thing to do. And so what you see here is a couple of graphs on the left showing how fast the system works as a function of the branching factor of this volumetric tree. And on the right, how much memory is used as a function of tree depth. So a tree depth of 1 would be no subdivision at all, and a tree depth of 10 would be the maximum amount of subdivision, so that would be more or less the octree. And so what you see is that the speed is not hit too badly until you go above depth about 3. And conversely, the memory decreases quite sharply down to depth 3 and then 4, but after that there's not much gain. So 3 or 4 seems to be around the sweet spot for getting the very best performance out of this system, and that's what's done. So lastly, I'll just show you some of the results from these very extensive scans of three-dimensional space that are now possible. Here is a scan moving through a bookshop in Cambridge, I guess. Doesn't look very much like a bookshop, does it? It says it's a bookshop. But anyway, it's certainly scanning it, whatever it is. And you see we're able to, oh no, it is a bookshop. We're going inside. That was the outside of the bookshop, of course, in Cambridge with the bicycle against the window. What else? Here's the books. And as we move around, you see we've really traveled quite a long distance, and you can also see the quality of the reconstruction progressing as we move around. The first few frames tend to be coarse, and then they refine themselves. You see that the scanning process just survived having somebody move through, and that was the data association part of the algorithm, imparting robustness to the method. And my goodness, we really have done a lot of reconstruction. And so here is all of the space that's been visited and the three-dimensional structure that's been reconstructed, and reconstructed to quite some quality and in real time, in the sense that it appears in real time as you move through. And here is another reconstruction referred to as fusion style, and if anyone can work out why that is, it's a bit of an obscure reference. I don't apologize for that. Let's see what's happening here. It's the engine bay of a particular car, and you see it really does get quite high quality reconstruction compared with what you could get from a single frame. And you can see the details filling in. There's both the issue of filling in details that are kind of around the side that you can't see in one view, and also the idea of getting super resolution because of this weighted combination of the successive depth maps. And finally, here are frozen frames of some of the recovered structure in this rather gorgeous sports car. I happen to have one of these myself. So there we are. In summary, we've the lab has generated this large-scale 3D reconstruction system that works in real time. It's using the GPU intensively to make some well-known principles of 3D reconstruction work at very fast and at scale, and also has introduced some new ideas both in the details of how the computation is distributed across the GPU and in that discovery of what's the optimal organization of the tree and its branching factor to make this happen. And of course there's still a lot to do. We have to do a little bit better with sewing together successive frames of the camera over these very large distances, closing loops, recovering from featureless areas where the camera localization may not work so well. We'd love to make a portable one of these, really portable, with no hanging cables, and not quite sure what's going to be the best way to do that. Also, some computer vision people, harking back a little bit to the previous session, are thinking about how to use this capability to label do a great deal of labeling of the world and its 3D structure and how that associates with object labels. And let me just finish by showing you the names of all of the people in the team. And at the bottom is the website that you could look up for further information, and Sharam's email in case you want to tell him something. Thanks very much.
Thank you. So we have time for questions. There's a microphone coming.
I have one question regarding in the final view that you did, there was some vegetation, some bushes.
Some what, sorry? Sir?
Vegetation,
Okay.
bushes, plants.
Yes.
My question is, what happens if there is some wind or movement and the leaves move and you cannot register a same position?
Well, I should, definitely have put that on the further work section. I know it's in the minds of the inventors to do something about that. I'm not quite sure what their strategy is. At the moment, as much as we can do is to tolerate a certain amount of that. So if you have a scene where a minority of stuff is moving around, then there's some robustness to that. But if nearly everything is moving around, of course, that's very much harder. And I don't know if they have some good tricks, but it's clearly, something out there to be solved.
Any other questions?
Andrew, what happens if you have something like a mirror being part of the image?
Yeah.
And are there tricks that can be played about understanding something of the scene that's reflected in the mirror, so the camera effectively has, or the sensor has, more than just the
I'm just thinking, is there any way the Kinect won't do the obvious thing when it sees a mirror? I guess it will do the obvious thing, and it'll see the scene extended and reversed into the mirror, and will treat that as real. So then, the thing will be just totally convinced that the extension of the scene into the mirror is the real thing, and it'll sort of behave in a way that's consistent with that. So it'd be like looking through a window at a reversal of the scene, and there's nothing the thing can do that will tell it that
which
is
is
a fantasy.
fine if it's a mirror in a wall.
Yeah.
But if the camera can also see behind the mirror, if it's freestanding, then it will get confused, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, or if it could recognize the reflection from having looked around the other direction.
Right.
It could do that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's thank the speaker once more. And while Noah is setting up, it's my pleasure to introduce the third and final speaker in this afternoon's session. Noah Snavely is an assistant professor at Cornell University, where he's been since 2009. He got his PhD at the University of Washington before that. And he's also a recipient of a Microsoft New Faculty Fellow. And he's going to be talking to us about his work in location recognition, which he's chosen to title The Distributed Camera.
Thanks a lot, Rick. Hey, everybody. I realize... Hey, everybody. Great. It's wonderful to be here, and good to see you all. So right, I'm going to be talking about something that I've been thinking about and been excited about for a while, which I've been thinking about as the distributed camera, which is sort of that camera that exists by virtue of billions of people around the world having cameras with them at all times, taking photos and sharing them with everybody, and sort of what you can do with that. So we're living in an age that's unprecedented in terms of the sheer volume of pixels we all have access to. So it's hard to get an exact count, but whether it's 1 trillion or 3 trillion, certainly there's over 1 trillion photos available online. And this is growing all the time. Millions of new photos uploaded every hour to photo sharing sites. These are interconnected. You can access them. They're not in a shoebox somewhere. You can actually go and see pictures. So it's really the case that the internet is becoming this unprecedented living visual record of our world, with every city and landmark, events, people captured over and over again and stored forever. Okay, so that's an intriguing idea, and it's a very new idea too if you think about the history of photography. So photos have been around for about 2 centuries in a way we'd call a photo. And that's sort of been the history of it becoming easier and easier slowly over time to take photos and disseminate them. So back in the 1820s, when the first photographs were being taken, taking photos was a very hard and labor-intensive process. You had to have special equipment, and you have to know what you're doing. And then, over time, film was invented in the late 1800s. George Eastman pioneering photography, and the Brown 8 came out, which gave photography to the masses. Very famous and popular camera that was made into up into the 60s. Then there was another revolution in the late 80s and 90s when digital cameras started to be made. So if this is an early digital camera that you could buy from Kodak, probably cost a lot of money. And then slowly it became, you could take thousands of photos without batting an eyelash because you could store them all on your digital card. And then sort of the last thing that's been happening is the ability to share all these photos. So in the last 10 years or so, first with sites like Flickr and now Facebook and other, Instagram, you can share photos very easily right after you take them. So we're to the point where 350 million photos are uploaded per day to Facebook, 100 hours of video per minute uploaded to YouTube. It's just a massive, incredible, mind-bogglingly huge amount of data. So this is one instance of big data, and you can generate lots of interesting anecdotes about it. So 1,000 Memories is a site you can go to. They'll help you scan all the photos you have in your shoebox. And so according to them, every 2 minutes today, we capture as many photos as the whole of humanity took in the 1800s. So that's amazing, and it's incredible. It's sort of sad too, but that's where we are. So big data. Whenever you see big data, you want to be able to do something with it, whether it's text or social media data. So what can you do with all this data? Is there anything interesting you can do, or is it just photos of cats? It's interesting to think about how you might use these photos to understand the world. Every photo records something that happened. It's a moment in time, right? So perhaps in the aggregate, you could start to do things like understand changes in cities or in the environment. Maybe you can study climate change through just these many, many recordings of things that were happening at given instances and places and times. Maybe you could start to understand through image understanding patterns of behavior like traffic or pedestrians. Maybe you could detect surprising events by seeing something anomalous happen in these photos, by just observing lots and lots of photos over time. And then there's sort of the forensic applications, so sort of detective work. Can you answer questions about what happened in the world and when and who and what and why? It seems like these kinds of applications could be possible. But of course, one of the challenges is this data is extremely unstructured. It's taken by billions of people with many different types of cameras, many different times and places. You don't necessarily know when and where a photo was taken. And of course, computer vision is very challenging, so it's hard to imagine how you would extract useful measurements and information from all this rich but very unstructured data. So that's one of the things I've been thinking a lot about, and we're starting to build tools that will hopefully make some of this possible, looking at it through the lens of geometry, as I'll talk about. So this is sort of, if you think about it, in the trend of citizen science, which has been around for a while. So sort of taking things that people do and everyday people and doing something useful with it. In this case, I guess the twist is that the people didn't know maybe that these photos could be used for something else. But citizen science has been around for a while. Where I work, Cornell, there's a great lab of ornithology, one of the premier bird labs in the country or in the world. And they have a great program for citizens to record birds and in such a way that it's useful to understand habitats and migration patterns and so on for the lab of ornithology. Astronomy, I feel, is one of the places that's been way ahead of the curve in these kinds of ways of thinking about the world and how to use the crowd. So Galaxy Zoo has been around for a while. It's a place you can go and learn to label galaxies, and lots of images taken by things like the Hubble Space Telescope, which have millions of galaxies in them, and people are very useful in this task. Another thing that's very inspiring to me that this is technology from maybe 5 to 8 years ago, this project called astrometry.net, which is done by computer scientists and astronomers. Sam Roweis worked on this project, which is a project to take amateur astronomy photos and automatically figure out the viewpoint of the telescope when that image was taken. So it just looks at the pattern of stars in the background and figures out where that photo must have been taken. Okay? And then it can label things inside the photo because it knows the viewpoint. So there's a Flickr group, astrometry.net. You can upload your photo there if you took one through a telescope, and it will automatically tag everything in it for you. And so the next logical step that astronomers did is try and see if they can make observations from this data, from multiple photos from different people over time. And they found, yes, they can do things like track the orbit of a comet from this amateur astronomy data, which is very, this is the only way to do it. They have multi-million-dollar instruments for doing the same thing. But it's intriguing that you might be able to use crowdsourced photos to do actual science. And they've been, astronomy has been ahead of the curve in trying to do this. There's also been some work in using just crowdsourced photos. Some very nice work from Dave Crandall's group on taking photos, geotagged photos from Flickr, and trying to estimate which parts of the country are covered by snow at a given time from these photos. So this kind of coarse scale analysis, geotags are often very noisy, but if you're just looking for coarse scale information, it's been shown to have been useful. But what we're after is much more fine-grained information, okay? So the sort that isn't possible with things like GPS alone. So we want to be able to, like astrometry.net, take any photo, except it doesn't have to have been pointed through a telescope. It's a photo of the world. For any photo that you find, be able to say where it's taken and precisely where it's taken and which direction the camera's looking, when it was taken, and moreover, what things are visible in the image. In fact, for any pixel in that image, you want to be able to say exactly what object in the world it corresponds to, whether it's some tree in Central Park that is in some database somewhere, or the buildings, the sky, people, etc. Which points are ground. You want to be able to explain every pixel in this image as in terms of some object. Okay? And why would that be useful? If you're a scientist who wants to study what's happening with trees in Central Park, different species flowering at different times, you sort of want to be able to relate things you see in images to actual objects in the world, like trees. So as I mentioned, we're starting to provide sort of the basic vision tools that allow for this kind of calibration. And it's really calibration is this problem. You're trying to figure out basic metadata, like what the pose of the camera was at a given time, and what, where objects are. So I think about it sort of as calibrating this massive distributed camera. OK. So of course, a natural question is, isn't GPS and other sensors in your camera enough? And surprisingly, it's not yet good enough to do very fine-grained, to relate stuff in the world to images in a fine-grained way. So here's just a very commonplace sort of example. The compass in the image says that it's pointing south, but the description, and if you actually look, it's pointed northeast. And these kinds of things happen all the time. It's, these sensors are noisy, and there's various reasons why they fail. Even the timestamp is often wrong for a number of reasons. So I think there's a very important role for computer vision in this kind of problem where you want very accurate camera poses. OK. So to briefly describe, there's been tons of work in location recognition. It's a little like object recognition, except you're not trying to recognize what something is. You're trying to recognize where this photo was taken. And in complete generality, it could be any place in the continuum of possible places on the globe, and any direction, too. So there's sort of a 6 degree of freedom set of camera poses that you want to compute. So a lot of the work's been image-based. So you have a database of geotagged images, and it's sort of a retrieval problem. You have a new image, you find a similar image in the database, and you say, that's where this image was too. So you sort of steal geotags in this image retrieval-based way. And that can work well for certain recognition problems, but for very, very fine-grained location recognition, if what you want is the camera pose, it's hard to do using just an image database. So what we've been doing is much more based on geometry. So we've been essentially trying to build geometry for the entire world and using this as an anchor for matching new photos to get back precise 6 degree of freedom camera poses for photos that match into this database. Okay? And so this builds on work I've been doing for a while, including with Rick and in collaboration with others too. But what we're doing is trying to populate the world with as much geometry as possible, compute sort of a digital copy of the world in terms of what you're seeing here, these point clouds, structure from motion created point clouds, sitting in the right place in the world. So there's a digital copy of Grand Central Station sitting where Grand Central Station is in the world, and that's a model that you can use to index new photos into. Okay, so here's some of the models we've computed. We have tens of thousands of these by now, covering lots of places in the Earth. Still a very small fraction of the total surface area of the Earth, mostly landmarks and so on, but we're getting there. Okay, so I think I'll wait until the end to show a demo because I'm not sure how much time I'll have. So again, this is based on work we've been doing for a while, first in phototourism for taking photos, like these photos of the Colosseum. And basically, by now we have very good algorithms for taking unstructured photos like these and turning them through computer vision automatically into geometry. So you put in a bunch of photos, and out comes points and camera viewpoints. So we get back this point cloud of the Colosseum in this case, and a bunch of viewpoints representing where each photo was taken inside this unstructured set you got from Flickr or wherever. Here's another example. We've been, over time, making bigger and bigger models from ever-increasing collections of photos. Here's a model of the city of Dubrovnik. Rick suggested we build this model, I think originally, because he thought it would be a good city to try. And indeed, it produces a beautiful-looking reconstruction. Again, you can see camera viewpoints, these little wireframe black pyramids. You can see the city reconstructed as this ghostly version of Dubrovnik, rendered as a point cloud. So millions of individual 3D points floating in space atop their actual geometry. Okay? So again, this is sort of a digital copy now of Dubrovnik. And if we can situate it on the globe, it will sort of overlay on top of the real city. Okay? We've done this for many different places. We took some great work by Dave Crandall, again, work at Cornell with Dan Huttenlocher and John Kleinberg and others on identifying landmarks from geotagged photos. So just downloading lots of geotags, figuring out clusters that correspond to popular places to take photos. This is sort of our input, and we build 3D models of each of these clusters that are discovered automatically through this algorithm. Here's a list of the top 8 landmarks. They're ordered by popularity, so Eiffel Tower is first. Then you have a bunch of things in London and Paris and Rome and New York City. And then you get into Detroit and, I guess, Columbus, Ohio, and Des Moines, Iowa. And there's a very long tail of places people take photos. And as we speak, we have many servers at Cornell building more and more geometry for more and more parts of the world, downloading, scraping the web, and what have you. So this is just a snapshot of the kinds of things we're indexing from scraping Flickr. We also use Street View data. It's very useful for getting more coverage. So Navtech has this very nice San Francisco Street View data set. Here's some of the images from their Street View database. And here's a model of downtown San Francisco. Again, the same kind of point cloud model, except now we're looking down from several kilometers up on top of this structure motion reconstruction of most of downtown San Francisco. Okay? So we're shamelessly grabbing photos wherever we can and building geometry from them and indexing them in this big database. And if things work right, because these photos are geotagged, you can then align those models with the surface of the Earth such that they overlay again accurately with the real world. So here, a place near and dear to my heart, this is Cornell, the Arts Quad. Beautiful place with beautiful 19th century buildings. And the red points here are places we've reconstructed 3D points automatically, and you can see that they overlay quite well with the actual map of the buildings on campus. Okay. So it's this, again, sort of this ghostly version of the world sitting atop the real world, composed of these millions of 3D points. So what we're using that for, this database for, is location recognition. Very precise location recognition. So humans are pretty good at guessing roughly where images are taken. So here's an example. And I'm sure somebody here can tell me where this photo was taken. What? I'm sorry? Yeah, what city?
I don't think it's Havana.
It is. It's the obvious one, sorry. Yeah, so this is taken in Havana. You can tell from the car. I could probably mask out the background and you could still tell. Okay, Havana. Here's a harder one. Any ideas? It's in Europe. It does sort of look like maybe the Royal Mile's in there somewhere. But actually, this is Utrecht. Not quite the same country. Maybe, I don't know, maybe they're similar cities. But yeah, so you can probably tell it's in Europe somewhere, but telling exactly where it's taken to the precise building this was taken from is difficult. So what we're doing is, OK, we treat this model as our database, these lots of 3D models that we've geo-registered. We take a new photo. You may recognize this as taken in Chicago, the famous bean. We extract features from this image, match them into this humongous database of 3D points. A lot of those matches are right. Many of them are wrong. And then by some magic, you estimate, based on the matches, where that image must have been taken to explain those matches. So you do a pose estimation of that camera. And if you do it right, oh, you figured out that the camera is sitting exactly there, looking in that direction at the bean and the buildings in the background. So you do feature matching to this huge database, and then pose estimation, and that's how the process works. And this is very difficult because as your database of 3D points gets larger and larger, so in this case, we're assuming we don't know anything about where this photo is taken. We have to search the entire world. This matching becomes very, very challenging. So to give you a sense, the largest model we created by concatenating all these individual models from different places has about 500 million 3D points created from several million images. Each 3D point has a descriptor. It's a high-dimensional, 128-dimensional SIFT descriptor associated with it. That describes the appearance of that point, what it looks like in images, so we can match to that when we see a new image. And we index this using standard KD trees. And so I'm a big fan of new work in automatic approximate nearest neighbors. I think Bill's also talked about this in the past, how this is still a problem. I want better algorithms for finding nearest neighbors, high-dimensional nearest neighbors in big databases. So it's a challenging problem to find good nearest neighbors. We do our best, but we have to come up with new tricks to deal with the noisy matches we get from matching new images to this big database. Okay? So to give you a sense of the tricks we use to be able to take these very noisy matches we get into this big database and find the actual camera pose, again, so it's not uncommon for 10% of the matches to be in the Eiffel Tower because there's so many 3D points. It's a very rich scene. So no matter what photo you match, a lot of them are going to be at the most popular scene, the Eiffel Tower. And then the rest will be distributed around the world. Some of them will be at the right place. But even just counting, simple vote for the landmark doesn't work very well. So we use some tricks. So one trick we use is the fact that it turns out that not all of these 3D points we're creating are created equal. So some of them are weak 3D points and not good ones, and some of them are very strong 3D points in the sense that when we create these models, we also get sort of account for which images see which 3D points. Some 3D points are just seen by 2 cameras. That's sort of the minimum you need to do triangulation. So this nondescript window corner maybe is only seen in 2 images, whereas others are seen in hundreds of different images. And these tend to be salient and often photographed and very detectable parts of the scene. And it turns out that actually, a little surprisingly, but also sort of intuitive, the most visible, so to speak, 3D point in this entire Dubrovnik data set is this clock tower, which is sort of what you'd expect. It's very salient. It's sort of high up, so you can see it from lots of places. It just turns out that, so if you were to index the entire city of Dubrovnik with a single 3D point, it should be that point. So we use that to sort of prioritize the points that we match to in our database. It also turns out that there's these clusters, these configurations, these constellations of different points that often co-occur together. So here's just some triplets, some images showing triplets of 3D points that often co-occur in the same image. And these are not necessarily nearby in 2D or even nearby in 3D space. They're just nearby empirically based on the statistics we can derive from our 3D models. So again, we can use these as sort of ways of getting more evidence for which matches are correct, because if you see all 3 of them at once, it's stronger evidence that you're actually looking at that place as you'd less likely to see them all at once by chance. Okay? So without getting into much of the science, that's sort of a high-level description of some of the tricks we use to solve this very, very difficult matching problem. Okay? And so we run that on our noisy matches, and we compute a lot of possible hypothesis poses sort of in a Ransack-style framework, but with these extra modifications, and we get good poses out often. Not always, but pretty often. We have very few false positives, but we often say we don't recognize that place, sometimes because it's not in the database, and sometimes because we just didn't get enough feature matches. Here's an example showing, OK, here's an input image. We don't know where it is in the world. We put it through our whole system, and it says, OK, this image must have been taken here, looking in that direction. And just eyeballing it, you can see that it's surprisingly good. It's actually, it's looking through that fountain at the National Gallery in the background. And that's, again, searching this entire database and then computing this needle in a haystack pose in the continuous space of possible poses. We also solve for other things. We even get the focal length of the camera and radial distortion parameters of the lens. We solve for all that as part of this geometry-based recognition process. Works well for some outdoor scenes. Here's Machu Picchu. Can work for complicated and messy and noisy scenes. Here's an example in Times Square where we recognize, despite a big Pikachu in the scene. Here's some more nondescript scenes. So we matched it. Again, we have all of downtown San Francisco indexed. So here's some more street view type nondescript images, not landmarks that we can recognize. So in comes that image. We say, OK, it must have been taken at the corner of Beach and Jones, again, through this matching process. And here's some other relatively nondescript-looking query images that we can still estimate good poses for. And it works very well. This geometry actually gives you a lot, because both, right, so finding a pose that explains exactly the matches you saw, geometry is a very strong constraint for that. And so compared to these image-based techniques I talked about, we perform quite well and exceed them in many cases. OK. Here's another. So you could still ask, well, is this really accurate? We want pixel accuracy. How well is this really doing? One way to check this is by taking our poses and rendering them inside of another sort of database that has geometry that's well registered. So in this case, so we put this image in, got back a camera pose, and then rendered that same viewpoint inside of a 3D world model, in this case, Google Earth. And if both Google Earth and us are correct, we should see exactly the same image. Here I'm showing a version of the image that's color-coded. So Google Earth gives us geometry from this viewpoint. We can color-code that. So red is sky, yellow is building, blue is ground. And you can see that they're not perfectly registered, but they're very close. And so that suggests we're getting near pixel. When this works well, we get near pixel accuracy. So at least we agree with Google Earth, what Google Earth thinks this viewpoint should look like. Here's another example. This is in Paris, the Pantheon. One of the things you can see, again, it's well registered. Not the building. I don't know if these buildings are quite tall enough. It's not sure if that's our fault or Google Earth's. But you get a depth map for this for free. Google Earth has the geometry. The hard part was finding where the camera was. Now you can access all this other these other sources of geometry and get back other information like a depth map for free. So this also harkens back to some beautiful work from Rick's group, actually, at Microsoft Research a few years ago, where they used building models but had to register the images by hand and then use those models for various graphics applications, like removing haze, which turns out to be much easier if you have a depth map for the image. OK. But here we did it completely automatically, just using computer vision. OK, so we're getting pretty good at recognizing locations very precisely when we have them in our database. Another thing I talked about was time. So time is interesting. So many images are not accurately time-stamped for one reason or another. They didn't set their clock when they went to New York City and they live in Amsterdam, right? So how can we tell time from an image? So it's a very challenging problem, as you can imagine. And we're trying a bunch of different ways. And I'll tell you about one of the ways we're doing it. But we still don't. It's very hard to come up with a general way to tell time from a photo. But so interestingly, there's a fire monument in London, built in the 17th century to memorialize the Great Fire of London, which I guess destroyed a lot of the city. And atop that fire monument for several years, actually, was a webcam that took a 360 panoramic view of London for every minute for about 3 years. And so here's 1 day's worth. This is a beautiful piece of art, actually. 1 day's worth of video, panoramic video of observing London from atop this fire monument. Okay, and you can see all sorts of interesting things happen, with the sun and lighting and cars. It's an amazing visualization of the city. So we use this to come up with possibly the world's most convoluted way to tell time, which is, okay, we have an image, maybe we know the date, because often the date's right even if the time's wrong. We can use our system to geolocalize it and say, okay, it's standing on this bridge looking across the Thames towards the north. So we can then take that image, we know all the geometry, we can project it onto the heavenly dome. We know which part of the sky it covers. We can use automatic segmentation algorithms, geometric context to segment out the sky. And then all we have to do is correlate that patch of sky with the entire webcam video and see where the clouds match. So clouds are very interesting in that they're sort of a very unique, often there's no clouds in the sky, depends where you are in the country. London's very cloudy, so it's a good case study for this. Seattle, I guess, would work well too. But clouds are more or less a unique signature if they exist to that time. It's not too overcast. You have to have some contrast. But you can imagine using clouds as a very accurate way to tell time. And it works surprisingly well. I guess you also have to have a webcam nearby, or maybe satellite imagery would work eventually. So we just correlate this with the entire day's worth of webcam data, find a good match, and then we can say, oh, this must have taken at this time 4:08 GMT, and indeed this is the right time because we have the ground truth for this image. So it's sort of crazy that this works, but you can tell time just by observing clouds in the sky. So again, not very general, but when it works very well. And here's just a comparison. You can sort of flip back and forth and convince yourself that they're not exactly right because this image wasn't taken at exactly the same place as the webcam. They're probably a kilometer apart. But you can see, okay, these do look like the same clouds. Here's some other examples where you can probably convince yourself that they're looking at the same part of the sky at the same time. Clouds move quite quickly, actually. So when it works, you get a pretty precise timestamp, within a minute usually. Okay, so we're still playing around with this. This is fun and interesting. There's other ways you can tell time, shadow, and so on that we're looking into as well. Okay, we're also very interested in time scales that are greater than a day. So there's all these beautiful historical images, despite the fact that the 1800s saw many fewer images than we see even in one day today. There's a lot of very useful data that we'd like to integrate with our models, and matching is very hard. We're working on better features based on symmetry, local symmetries for this problem, and starting to get better matches for very, very different looking images across time. Okay, so that's a description of some of the work we're doing to solve this massively difficult calibration problem. And I just want to give a sense of the next directions we're heading in. So one of the things that changes over time is the appearance of an object. Whether it's because the sun is moving and it's lit from different directions, or the weather's changing, or the object itself is changing, like it's corroding, or changing in other ways, graffiti. So we have, from these internet photo collections, very rich descriptions of scene appearance over time. We'd like to be able to characterize that appearance and how it's changing. Another direction we're very interested in is tying images to other sorts of geographic data. The webcam is an example, sort of like a weather atlas we're comparing to. But there's so much data out there that's geo-registered accurately, whether it's OpenStreetMap, weather data, bus schedules. So you can imagine if you can localize an image well in space and time, you can leverage all this data. So if you knew exactly where and when this photo was taken, and you want to understand things that are happening, like detect cars or people, you could imagine that all of these extra bits of information that are on the web like bus schedules, could help you in scene understanding. So, you could use online geographic data to tell things like where are the streets in this photo, what was the weather like at this time, so you know something about the illumination. What's the bus schedules in Rome? That might tell you, if you might expect to see a bus in the scene, or you could flip that around, and if you detect a bus at a certain time, you could figure out if the buses are running late that day or not. So there's all these rich ways in which images can interact with all of this rich geographic data that's already out there on the web. So sort of a long-term vision is to try and integrate photos into this ecosystem of geographic data that is at all of our fingertips on the web. I already sort of mentioned this. We want to understand scenes over time, how they change at different time scales. At Pike's Place Market, when do the shops open every day? What's the pattern of traffic, and so on. And then this is sort of just a pitch, but we're also interested in taking things indoors, not building models of people's houses, which would be creepy, but giving people tools to remodel and modify their homes by using crowdsourcing and just building a database from large amounts of images of home interiors on the web. So we'll be presenting at SIGGRAPH work on understanding interiors by building a database of materials with reflectances and geometry from internet photos. OK, I'm going to skip my demo. And actually, I'm just going to go to the end. Thank you very much. You can see more information there, and I'd be happy to take questions.
I have a very simple question.
Yeah.
What was the demo?
Oh, OK. It's a very simple demo. OK, I'll show it while we're speaking. So you can try this out online. It's actually live. You can upload your photos. And it will stream to our server and try and recognize where you were. I also included a pizza photo in there you might have seen. That doesn't work. We can't recognize pizza. But you can see, OK, as we're uploading the photos, it's recognizing them. It works in some surprising cases. So this is a photo taken by Ansel Adams. I guess in the 60s, the US, what is it? The National Park Service, right. Commissioned him to take photos. This is in Mesa Verde National Park, and it was able to find it after 40 years of heat and rain in that part. But yeah, so you can just upload your photos. Here's another one in Tokyo at this statue of the Buddha, and you can see that it not only figures out roughly where it is, but the right viewpoint and so on. It's taken on this side of the statue. So that's the demo, and thank you. Thanks for I love that question.
OK, one more question, and then it's time for a break.
You mentioned that you're doing some work to do matching over time.
Yeah.
How does the system perform at the moment in terms of night versus day, winter versus summer, those kind of problems?
It works in a way that I can't characterize. So sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And I'm not sure exactly when it will work and when it won't. So nighttime and daytime is an interesting case. There are many cases of scenes where it works fine and I get a single model, say this in the 3D reconstruction process, it creates a single model where they're both in the same coordinate system. And there's cases where I'll get two models, one for daytime and one for nighttime. And I haven't yet figured out what exactly is the difference between them. But in general, the more difference the appearance is, the harder this matching will become. And especially matching over 100 years worth of time is extremely difficult.
OK, this brings our session to a close. Let's thank all of our speakers once again.